In this video, we're going to talk about performance measures. Now, it's clearly the case that management need to have some sort of measures in place if they are to judge how well or how effective they're managing the business. It's important that they're able to set a benchmark for themselves, set their objectives and set them out clearly, and then measure the extent to which they have achieved what they set out to achieve. So having performance measures is an important part of management in trying to work out how effective management is. So if we look at management functions, well, we first of all have need assessment. What does the management need? Well, let's start at the beginning. What do the customers need? Then what does the organization need in order to satisfy customers' needs? Then we have the performance measurement, how to gauge or measure the effectiveness of management in meeting the needs of the organization. And it's also looking at operational plans and budgets and project management. So management functions, not surprisingly, run the whole gamut, run all the way across the management of the business. But you can see in here that performance measurement is an important aspect of the management function. So let's start by just looking at the simple management cycle. We have strategies and resources. Strategies need resources in order to enable the strategies to be enacted and played out. The resources lead, of course, to actions. The resources have to be acted upon, perhaps processed into a product or into a selling activity or a marketing activity or a HR activity, whatever it is. But resources are committed and then action follows. And then following the action, there is some sort of review of the action to see how well the action has met the strategies. So that completes the cycle. The review part is very important because it's an indicator of how effective management has been. And therefore, in order to be more objective about management and about management's performance, indicators must be used. And that's what we're going to discuss in a little more detail. So let's start by looking at, if you like, the perfect world. In a perfect world, a measurement system will actively promote performance by measuring what matters and providing corrective feedback and positive reinforcement to enthusiastic people who enjoy being measured and take improvement on as a challenge. So, in the perfect world, people will measure what matters. Sometimes measurement seems to be conducted for the sake of measurement, and that's a waste of resource and can be very counterproductive, can alienate people. It's important just to measure precisely what needs to be measured. But it's also important, based on the measurements, to provide feedback and to reinforce good practice and to make suggestions for how to correct practice which is not meeting the objectives. If the people enjoy their work and are involved in the whole work process and can see the logic of what they're doing, they will tend to be enthusiastic people and they will enjoy being measured, because if they're getting it right, it's a reward to them. They feel like they are being praised. The figures alone are praising them because they've been achieving what they set out to achieve. And if they're not achieving it, then the figures will indicate what's going wrong and how it can be fixed and improvements can be made. So in fact, the use of performance indicators could be a motivator. It can help people who are enthusiastic about their work and are keen to get on in their work to make improvements and give them feedback to help them to make those changes. Now, the attributes of a good measurement system. Well, an effective performance measurement system should have the following attributes. First of all, it should focus on effectiveness. It should look at the extent to which the use of the resources are achieving the objectives that were set. The use of labour, machinery, raw materials, all the energy of the business, to make sure that it's effective. It is achieving what was set out in the plan, because that's why the business exists. The business exists to try and satisfy customer needs and meet the objectives it set itself in the context of customers' needs and feedback from the marketing section, marketing department. So it's important that an effective performance measurement system should focus on effectiveness. Effectiveness appears twice. We have a need to measure better, to be more precise in the measurements, not just take any measurements for the sake of it, but to be focused on the whole need for measurement and to make sure that the measurements are more precisely taken and more accurate, and only measure what is required. There's also a need to measure less. Don't just measure everything for the sake of it. For a start, it will probably generate too much information and can't be handled. But don't just measure for the sake of it. It must be measured because there is a need to measure. Otherwise, it's a waste of resource in itself, or it could even alienate some people who are now being measured who didn't need to be measured. And the focus should be on the future. The focus should be looking forward. The purpose of the measurement is to gain some insight into the effectiveness of the processes, to make recommendations for improvement, and the whole idea is that these changes which come about as a consequence of taking the measurement, if changes are required, the changes will focus on the future. They'll focus on generating a better service for the customer in the future, or a more efficient way of production in the future. So taking measurements and acting upon the measurements, acting upon the data, and when it's analysed, the information from the measurements, acting on that should improve customer experience, efficiency. It should improve profitability going into the future. So focus on objectives, the key result areas. Now, the key result areas are those functions or divisions of performance in which your organization must continually improve to be successful. So the key result areas are the critical areas of the organization, the areas that must improve continuously. This may be in terms of the design of the product, or of manufacturing, or of outsourcing, or whatever it is. That key function, the one that upon which the business is reliant, that key function should not only be running smoothly, but the measurements taken from that should indicate improvements, areas of improvements, areas where further investigation is needed, more involvement of management, and so on. So the key result areas are isolated out. They're recognized and are treated in such a way as to make further improvements to the organization. So key result areas are the critical areas of the business, the absolutely vital areas that the business must get right. There's a long list of these. We could start with the customer. That's a key result area, and the customer comes first. The customer must be dealt with. It's important to understand the customer's needs and requirements. It's important to see what changes in customer behaviour there are over the years, and what's the current trends and fashions, and what are the competitors doing, and so on. But customers come first, and trying to ascertain what customers want is an essential activity for the business. As I said, this is a long list, so the next one will be the product and service. It must be the case that the product and service is right, not only in the context of customer requirements, but also in terms of efficiency of production and distribution. The organization must make a product that the customers want and are willing to buy, but they must make it efficiently and they must distribute it efficiently. There's also a need to look at the natural environment, look at resources, and look at the reputation of the business in the community. Look at society and see what society expects of the business. If the business is producing a lot of waste products that are damaging the environment, or it's noisy, or it's causing problems with traffic, or whatever it is, these need to be taken into account, because the business should enjoy a good reputation which will further enhance its image in the marketplace, as well as, of course, being the right thing to do. However, in terms of priority so far, we've got customer, number one, product, service, number two, and the natural environment. Then we've got marketing. And marketing really, in a sense, builds on all of these, but marketing is the process that is the fact-finding process. It's looking to see what the customer experience is and ways of improving the customer experience. So it's looking at the customers, the products, the image of the business, and trying to promote the business by looking at these various aspects. Of course, people make the products, and it's important that people within the organization are not just safe, but they're also happy to be working there. They're finding the experience acceptable. Jobs are enriched and enlarged, and the worker experience is quite positive. They relate to the organization. That's important. So that's a key result area as well. So now we've expanded it to 5. Of course, the production process should be safe, efficient, clean. The environment in which production takes place should not be dangerous. It should not be noisy or excessively noisy. Not necessarily a pleasant environment, but one which is easily tolerable. So that's another area. It all needs to be maintained. The production system needs to be maintained. The buildings, the offices, the equipment, it all needs maintenance. So that also is an area to be looked at. Of course, the operations itself, how the product is made, the technology, the tooling up of the product, management of the stores, the material movements, material handling, all of that needs careful consideration. So now we're up to 8. Finance. Finance should be done efficiently to ensure good cash flow, to ensure that the bills can be paid on time. So finance is important, and it's important that there's accurate information upon which to base financial decisions, and financial information is fed into management for all sorts of reasons, for investment purposes, for borrowing purposes, and so on. So good measures relate to stakeholders' satisfaction. And that's what we learn from this list. If we look at the stakeholders, say in finance, it's the customers, it's the suppliers, and their relationship with the business in terms of payment and receiving payment. Operations, how the organization structures its production and its operations in a way that enables workers and management to cooperate and have a good working experience, and so on, going all the way back to the customer. And the customer, of course, must have a good experience from the product and feel there's value for money. And The customer in this case is the prime stakeholder. The customer is the one that needs to be taken into account over and above the rest. But the rest are important. It's just that the customer is very important. Now, key performance indicators, KPIs. This is the essence of measurement. The concept of the key performance indicator is an indicator is a gauge or a measure that reports information. So a key performance indicator, an indicator is a gauge or a measure that reports information. So it's a measure, it's a gauge, it's an indicator. And in this case, it's a key indicator. It's looking at the key areas and it's measuring, and therefore it's an indicator of the performance of those key areas. Performance is the result or activity we are looking for that fits into strategic goals. So performance is, first of all, specified in the strategic goals, and then it's measured, it's gauged or measured by the indicator. And in this way, management know if the strategic goals are being met or not being met. And that's important. Key, the word key means that this measure has been pinpointed so carefully that management know precisely what to do. It's the key measure. This is the essential measure. This is the one that management is critically aware of. Management knows what this measure is and what it does. So it's a key measure. Measures are developed to capture both the input and output elements of a business system. So they can be measures of inputs, the number of workers in a particular process, the number of machines, the amount of space in the store. These are inputs. And the output element, how many items were produced, how many items were purchased, how many items were delivered to market, and so on. So the key performance indicators are linked to inputs and outputs. And they also flag up any movement away from what was specified in the strategic plan. So let's look at some. We'll look at speed indicators. This is the response time. And it looks at the records for the response time. It looks at how fast is an issue dealt with. If an order comes in, how long does it take to complete the order? If a machine breaks down, how long does it take to fix the machine, get it back online? How long does it take to switch over from one line of production to another? What's the response time? So the company has perhaps kept historic figures of how long it takes to switch over a line of production or satisfy a particular customer's requirements, and is able to measure current response times against previous ones to indicate improvements, if there are any. Again, it's a measure of the effectiveness of management. How well is the organization being managed? How fast can the organization deal with issues like customer demand and machine breakdown and vehicle breakdown, if it's delivery by road or whatever it is. Turnaround time records. How long does it take to turn around a whole job? How long does it take to set up a job, produce it from start to finish, and get it back to the customer? So how long does it take between receiving the order and completing the order? Just look, chase through an order from start to finish. How long does it take? And compare that to what happened in the past as well. Look at the cycle time records. How long does it take for particular, let's say, cycles of production to run through? The company may produce a particular cycle. It may produce one item for a week and then another item for a week and a half and so on. But are those cycle times accurate? What determines the cycle times, and um, should they be changed? Should they be monitored and changed, or what sort of analysis is undertaken to recommend the optimum cycle time? Look at project completion dates. Look at what the company promised in the past and what are currently promising in terms of completion dates against actual completion dates. And that's an indication of speed. Are they meeting what they said they were going to meet, or are they falling behind? Meeting scheduled time records. There are sometimes scheduled times issued for particular jobs. Workers are given an hour to complete this task and 18 minutes to complete the next one, and so on. Are the workers meeting those scheduled times? Are there issues about the scheduled times? Are there problems about them? Or maybe the scheduled times are too generous because technology has moved on and now the workers have new machines which enable them to go faster. But just simply look at the scheduled times and try to work out how accurate are they. And talking of accuracy, there are also accuracy indicators. Judgment-based climate or opinion surveys. Sometimes management have to make judgments. The judgments may be based on their experience, or it may be based on their best guess, or it may be based on opinion surveys. And one way or the other, how reliant are these measures or these indicators? I mean, are they accurate, or are they just wild guesses? Even looking at focus groups, the selection of a focus group may be biased, and the focus group itself may arrive with opinions which are prejudiced against the business or against the product or against competitors. So there may be bias or problems associated with using focus groups, and the accuracy of the outcome of the focus group could be challenged. Likewise with comment cards. Sometimes people are asked to complete a comment card and submit it, but the comment card may be completed when people are in a rush and they just write anything down. Or they may have an axe to grind against the organization or against industry in that area or against the owners of the business. So there are all sorts of issues that could lead to bias in terms of comment cards and also focus groups and so on. But these biases lead to inaccuracies. If the company bases its policy on this sort of feedback, then the company will be moving in the wrong direction. Telephone surveys. Again, the accuracy of telephone surveys not very high. People sometimes don't want to take a phone call, or they're busy and the phone rings, and if they do answer it, they may just try to dismiss the caller as quickly as possible by giving any answer. They're not necessarily considered answers or accurate answers. And again, it can lead the company in the wrong direction. Likewise, advisory panels. Sometimes advisory panels may be set up from experts, academics, or members of the community, or people who want to advise about production of this product or be involved in some way. But it doesn't mean that the advisory panel are experts. They may be just people who are interested as opposed to having an expertise. And again, their opinions may lead the organization in the wrong direction. The opinions of community leaders. Well, it's very difficult to know what a community leader is. Sometimes in some communities, particularly ethnic communities, some people are noted to be community leaders. But they're not elected, generally speaking, and they don't hold a lot of status in the wider community. So it's difficult even to know what a community leader is. Local politicians may be reticent to be involved with local companies because they could be open to the allegation of taking bribes or being influenced by the organisation or whatever. So local politicians, national politicians, generally speaking, don't get involved day to day in businesses. Meeting design specifications or passing an inspection point that ensures the product works. Well, that's accurate. If objectively the business successfully designs a product and it passes an inspection point and it's acceptable for health and safety and production and so on, it's feasible, then you could say that that process was accurate. There was an accuracy built in there, that there was a market, let's say, and the company rightly judged the market. It rightly got the design correct and the price correct and the technology, and was able to produce it. So it was getting a lot right, and therefore its predictions were accurate. Sometimes customers return items and claim on warranties. Again, the company has to be slightly circumspect about the accuracy of the reasons for the returns. It could be simply the customer didn't like the product when they received it, or they were there was something in the order that made them change their mind. They were just unhappy about the product, and there was nothing specific. It was just maybe a general feeling on the part of the customer that didn't like the product. It's difficult for the business to pick up on comments included with returns because, generally speaking, the comments are negative. And sometimes people exaggerate the negativity in order to make sure that they get their money back. So they're not necessarily accurate comments. But also volume indicators. Measures the amount, or if you like, the number of outputs or results from a specific activity or program. Number of units produced. So the volume is a measure of the amount of output or results from a specific activity or program. So it's, if you like, it's the number of completed transactions. That's the volume indicator. The number of transactions that are completed. But it could also be measured by the share of the market. If the company has 20% of the market and it goes up to 25%, then presumably the company is producing more and satisfying more of the market. It could also be measured by back order statistics, looking at back orders and looking at the success of the business in meeting customer requirements and customers' expectations. It's also important to be aware of the amount of failed sales due to being out of stock. That's important. It's a measure of the effectiveness of management again. But if orders are being lost because the items are not in stock or the raw materials are not in stock to make the items, then that is, in a sense, a gross failure of the organization. That should not have happened. Investment indicators. Well, measures the amount of resources expended on a specific program or activity or the unit cost. So if you like, it's the cost divided by the number of units produced. And that's a measure of, if you like, the effectiveness of the technology and of the capital. It's the cost of producing something divided by the number of units produced. If you like, it's the average cost. So operating costs per unit produced. It's important to know what the operating costs are. Management really ought to know what the costs of marketing, the cost of the HR section, the cost of all the various sections are. And management accountants are very good at being able to apportion overheads and apportion fixed assets according to the usage in various departments. So management accounting is very good at working these figures out. It's a big area of concern for management accountancy. But looking at the operating costs per unit produced is important. Looking at how much does it cost to make the product on average. How much does it cost to make these products? If the company makes 100 of the items and it costs £1,000, then it's £10 each. Now that could be compared perhaps to some figures calculated in the past, or some figures that were set out in the planning process of the organization when calculations were made back then. It's also important to look at the capital costs per unit produced. How much machinery and how much equipment are involved in production, and how many units are produced. The cost per customer as the sales and as a proportion of sales and marketing expenses. So what's the cost per customer arising out of sales and marketing? How much does it cost to market the product? How much does it cost to sell the product? Again, it's an indicator. The cost per unit of after-sales service and customer support. So how much does it cost to look after customers after they've made the purchase? Because this is an important part of marketing. So how much does that cost? So note that the financial measures are per something. The cost per unit, the cost per customer. So it really is an average. How many customers have they got? What was the cost of satisfying those customers? So divide the costs by the number of customers, gives you an average per customer. And that may be good enough to indicate how performance is running in the business. Say, compare it to last year's figures or the previous year's figures, and also look ahead towards what was expected when the business plan was developed and when detailed calculations were performed during the planning phase. So make those figures comparative, and that's an indicator of how effective the investment is. So in this video we've looked at performance indicators, key performance indicators, and these are important for management because they help management to measure its own effectiveness. Sometimes management may miss areas that need attention. Well, if there are key performance indicators, and these can be compared with, let's say, last year or recent calculations, then there's an indication of how effective the business is running and how effective resources are being deployed. If the indicators are not as good as in the past, then of course there is a case for management intervention and some sort of remedial action to take place. That's all we're going to deal with in this session. It's important again because indicators, key performance indicators, as I said, are used to measure the effectiveness of management, and that's why it's important to understand these notes, go back over them, make your own notes, play the videos a few times, and see what you think. Well, that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.